Hey, Jeff. It's really wonderful to see you again and be here on this wonderful day in the middle of Manhattan, where I believe you feel or felt at home. Throughout my life, I've been very much preoccupied, and all my life work is aligned with social impact and the effect of what we do, and especially of technology, on our life, on society, and on the world. I've been influenced by Carl Sagan, who was very preoccupied with environment, of course, in the grand scheme of things, but also Buckminster Fuller, who chose successfully to step off every system, including the financial and, of course, the corporate system. And he proved what one individual with bare hands and with their smarts and what was endowed, and of course with education, could do by themselves. And it is amazing. This is what actually we are doing here at IOG. We are empowering the fringes, but we also empower the individuals to give their best and stepping out of a system which is not actually always supporting them. You are a Wall Street veteran. You excelled in this very environment, in this very system, and yet you chose to now support an organization which is disrupting the very world in which you excel. What happened?
Well, I think you have to recognize that, throughout my career, even on Wall Street, I cared about emerging markets and how to provide capital to economies that were emerging. It wasn't always a theme throughout my career, but it was a theme at much of what I was, where I was operating. So it isn't a huge leap for me, but changing the environment and empowering people. I always think that in my mind, that's what I wanted to do. It wasn't the tools to do it weren't necessarily always in front of me. So what compelled me to come out of retirement was the concept of banking the unbanked, or providing services to people who didn't have services. I would have never come out of retirement to do another Wall Street job or another finance job. It had to be something that was going to be meaningful to me. And that's what brought me into this arena, and specifically what brought me to Charles Hoskinson, because when I was contacted to join the organization, my first instinct was to say no. And then I did some research, and it wasn't until, the plethora of information that was out there in YouTube and other forms of social media on Charles Hoskinson and what the CARDANO project was trying to accomplish is really what brought me to this company.
Yes, that's wonderful, and I completely agree. I can say ditto. That's what brought me to the company as well, what Charles and our amazing community are poised to accomplish. And, cascading disruption as we see happening all around us. So it seems to me, by meeting you, that my hopes are increasing that the UN SDGs and Wall Street maybe can be reconciled. Maybe more people like you from Wall Street can, let's say, have this awakening.
I think there's a theme, and I think it's technology provides the tools to marry capital and need. And so I think that by technology is empowering the individual to actually act. Mm-hmm. So I don't think Wall Street is necessarily a negative, evil force. They just happen to be an entity that is in it for profit. And
yes.
I think that when you marry that with some of the world organizations, some of the supranationals, or very politically driven, I think technology is kind of what brings them to the right place. And
yes.
So I'm hoping that what we can do is we can see more projects driven by more need, mm-hmm. More focused on what that need is and delivering results.
I need your wisdom now, from here, from Wall Street, because many of us are currently outraged It's a decision of our administration to print money irresponsibly. And although we already feel it here and there, and even here in New York, maybe more than in other places, because now prices are so much higher at everything, I'm wondering, yes, will really inflation, that bad thing, hit us? What are your expectations there? How should we get ready?
Well, I think inflation is inevitable, and some inflation is good. I mean, we're coming off kind of lows, so I don't think that inflation is necessarily a bad thing. Printing money uncontrollably is a bad thing, and I think that in the long run, I think the concepts of blockchains and cryptocurrencies may actually act as a controller on that more than anything else. And the question is can sovereign debt and the crypto markets coexist? And I think there's always a level where you could coexist. So government's decisions to print money, I think we're in uncharted territory. More than the environment, I'm concerned about what we're leaving our kids, right?
Exactly. This is scary, yes.
So I think about things and I quantify things in 100 basis point movements. And I say, wow, what does the national debt service look like 1% higher than today? And it worries me. But I also understand that conceptually, it's what will society bear from, if you look at every great nation, it ended based on its ability to borrow. So we may be going through a cycle and we may be challenged. I don't think we can grow out of this by taxing people. I think it has to be GDP. And that's why I think something like a blockchain could be very helpful to growing global GDP and taking economies that really almost don't exist and creating economies that do exist. So, I'm hoping that the long-term values switch from taxation to GDP growth, and that's where our focus is, and we have the technology to enable that growth globally. It's clear that the US has got a certain capacity to grow GDP. It's not clear to me what Africa's capacity is, but it seems like it's very unlimited at this point.
Yes, and we are helping them, supporting them.
So globally, can the world build itself out of this? I think it can. It just has to be more creative than tax and spend.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's where we bring the innovative factor here. And from how you described it with this transition from taxation to GDP, I kind of imagine, we have the Titanic today with the inflation coming, and we're building the lifeboats around it to save people and the economy with the technology that we are building. My question to you is, what do you think? Are you more for UBI, let's just help people, and what effect would that have on people? Because in my opinion, I think it would kind of disinterest them from putting in value like Buckminster Fuller did. So what I'm trying to say is that Maslow pyramid, yes, it's an ideal, but I don't think people would really self-actualize if they are not incentivized. So that the universal basic income would actually level them and disinterest them from self-actualizing.
So, personally, I personally like to help people. It's not, just because I'm a conservative doesn't mean I don't like to help people.
Definitely.
I think the beauty of a community like Cardano is the community gets to decide what it wants to do and what it values things. I don't think anybody 20 years ago could have envisioned an NFT market, but today there's value there, and tomorrow there may not be. But that's the beauty of the community, is isn't one view. It isn't a conservative view. It isn't a liberal view. It's a view that hopefully comes to some happy medium of what the community as a whole wants to do. One of the beauties of the Cardano community is it's not Asian, it's not European, it's not Latin American, it's global, and nobody has one cultural bias or another. So I think that if if the community decides it wants to reward people for its artistry, then it should do that, and then they could define what the value of that is. Now, as far as a minimal level of payments, I believe that people need to be helped for a period of time, but if you give them the tools to build their own wealth and build their reward system, I think you're doing a much better job. So I like the concept of rewarding people for their art or for their work, whatever it is. And I think you can build a value out of that. I mean, it's not insane. I mean, who would believe that a baseball player would make tens of millions of dollars to play baseball, or a basketball player? But it's entertainment. So you could value many different things, and it creates a marketplace for it. I mean, the NBA creates a marketplace for the value of a basketball player.
Yes.
Why not create a marketplace for the value of poetry or anything else?
I agree, and this also brings me to, of course, we have to extend that to other means and forms of expression, but also brings me to this concept of meritocracy, in which people are actually rewarded proportional to their contribution. So that is a bit different than what I say, because the universal creative income is like, okay, so I'm a poet. I have this gift. Others have gift of drawing or painting and so on. Then, if I contribute to something, let's say with my knowledge, my expertise, and so on and so forth, it's not always that those who contribute most are rewarded. So the criteria are pretty fuzzy in the world, and especially in the corrupt world, yes, when those elites are rewarding themselves a bit more than the others, and people do not have opportunity. So what we are doing at CARDANO is also, putting those incentives on the table also in a more meritocratic way. But we have to come up with a formula to really do it right. I really do not know if we can, and I know you rely on the community to do it, but I think for me it's still an open issue. How do we do meritocracy right?
I think that you have to rely on the community, but will the community look to outside expertise? Will it look to economists to develop a reward scheme for a specific action? And I mean, I would think that would be closer to the answer than not.
We need the experts,
and then
yes.
I think you would live in that reward scheme and see if it works, and then you could enhance it, eliminate it, and that's the beauty of having a voting system within the community so that they can make those decisions. Does this work? Does it not work? So it's funny because as a capitalist, I've gotten rewarded for providing capital.
Yes.
So, and those rewards are not disproportional to the risk I would take. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other things of value, right? But who's going to value those things? You have to create the community to value those things.
Yes, and you touched here, of course, a point which I'm not at peace with yet, and probably I will never be. So this is this Wall Street game, like money makes money. It never made sense to me, and I do not think it's also. Maybe it is a meritocracy for those who know to play the money make money game. But for me, it's like meaningless. So money makes money, and some people get rich while others, do not have what to eat, versus putting those money into projects that are, let's say, poised to create a better world, to save us from the climate crisis, to resolve the many crises which are out there. We put so much money also in wars and so on and so forth. So this kind of goes in the same direction. Do you think that it makes sense to, even for me, because that's what I dream, and I know I'm more or less a radical in that way, like to only put the money in projects? And I do not say without ROI. Yes, with ROI, but only in projects which are, as they say, ESG, as environment, society, governance, that are improving the world. So to put all our money only in such project, and all the projects to be vetted by an ethical board, by an ethics board, and no other projects to be approved. This is my ideal world.
Yeah,
I just wanted to know, what would you think about it?
I don't like that world.
Okay.
But not for the reasons you think. Let's first start with Wall Street. Money makes money.
Yes.
Wall Street provides liquidity. That liquidity is necessary to create the entrepreneurship. So if you look at capital markets start by someone saying, I need money for my project. Wall Street gets paid for having the liquidity to finance that project. And there's a risk-reward ratio that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work. But ultimately, what Wall Street is doing is providing liquidity to a system and allowing that system to grow. So that effort could be purely for providing clean water in Africa, right?
Yes, that's my kind of project.
Absolutely. And I don't want to, Wall Street is not an evil place because money makes money. They're providing the liquidity that keeps the capital system working. Without Wall Street, there is no Microsoft, there is no Google, there is no, and maybe that's all a great thing. But there's no SpaceX, there's no Tesla, there's no innovation, and there's no GE, there's no, I mean, you could go back in time, and it's created some of the best innovation. Now, human nature is greed, becomes good, and okay, it gets always driven to a certain level, but ultimately the core of Wall Street. So the reality is most people on Wall Street are just working people. Most people on Wall Street don't make a lot of money, right? There are a few people on Wall Street who make a lot of money, and they are the exception rather than the rule. I think there was a statistic, and I may have read it in one of the Freakonomic books, that the average person on Wall Street makes less than the average person on Main Street. And that's just averages. Now, of course, there are outliers, and there are hedge funds, and there are people who get paid extraordinary amounts of money to provide liquidity. There are also the people who take on extraordinary amounts of risk when nobody else would fund a project. So I think that if I were looking at where we're going with blockchain technology, I don't think that a good idea is for projects to be sponsored by supranationals or by Wall Street. I think they should be funded by those things, but created by individuals and people who are getting together to solve problems. So what I would like to see is a shift to a community becoming a project-oriented community, and maybe a supranational or Wall Street funding it. It could be something like, I've created a water machine, or I've created irrigation capabilities, or I've created aquaponics or hydroponics, or things that will help sustain communities. And those things should be funded and rewarded. And if they do well, Wall Street gets rewarded, and the supranationals can go on and take this experiment and then hopefully globalize it.
You know, when you mentioned Wall Street, Main Street, and all this, what's happening there and the dynamics, how I see it is like what we do is actually we are empowering Main Street to also really, or maybe with the transition, contribute financially to the projects which they want. And that's how I see Project Catalyst, for example. So, and such initiatives which enable the individual to contribute a fraction of whatever they can to a project which they believe in. And I am hoping that we will in the end transfer that power from Wall Street to Main Street completely. And that will be the transition.
I think that transition of power actually happens. Wall Street provides the money. It's Main Street that provides the company and the innovation and the output. So, I mean, I didn't know about Project Catalyst when I first joined this project. But when I heard about it, I was blown away. Conceptually, one of the greatest concepts I've heard of in a long time.
Totally.
And to be part of building Cardano and understand the concepts of Catalyst and empowering the Cardano community to invest in projects on Cardano, I think it's brilliant.
How do you see a project like Catalyst working with Wall Street?
Wall Street does not have to be the only source of capital. If you could develop other sources of capital, fine. I mean, I don't think that Wall Street will necessarily take the risk that catalyst would take. So
Okay.
I think that there are many layers of funding, and I think Catalyst provides that opportunity for a community to focus, right? It's a reason why Charles and IO Global were able to take a longer path to develop Cardano. If this was a Wall Street project, we would have been forced to show results much sooner.
Yes.
And because it's not, and because it has a funding mechanism to grow itself, we can take the methodical path and create an infrastructure that will hopefully outlive us all. When you look at the empowerment of what an ecosystem could do, like Cardano, if people want to solve problems, if they want to solve third world problems or emerging market problems, if they want to solve their financial problems, they could decide to do that by simply voting to do that within their ecosystem. And that's what I actually love about our project.
Yes, we are empowering people indeed to put forth those forces of good, I would say, within them as well. And as such, this is what, of course, we have in Project Catalyst and the impact project which I'm leading. Of course, there are things which are priceless, like leaving a better planet for our kids, right? Like our love for our kids in general, which is unconditional. And of course, there are things on which we put price tags. Yes, and I think the priceless things are the ones which have the social impact. And the question is, and it's always been on my mind, is how we measure that, how we measure what is priceless. Like definitely, for some things, I live for them, to live a better world for tomorrow, to the next generations. And as they used to say, we did not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrowed it from our children. So this is like ancient wisdom. And the question is, how do we measure? How do we put a value and a price tag on the priceless?
I guess the answer is we don't have to, right? To turn that around, how do you put a price tag on an entrepreneur who's willing to change the way we think about things? How do you put a price tag on an idea that the economy doesn't need to be centralized, that it could be a community-driven thing? It's like COVID. COVID doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. If you live in a city like New York, you're worried about hospitals being overrun because of population. If you live on an island in the Gulf of Mexico, you're less worried about hospitals being overrun because there aren't that many people there. It's very hard to generalize a very big statement. I think that, this is why you have to focus on some very specific things. When you talk about things being priceless, I guess why I got involved with this organization was it answered some very specific questions for me. Like, how do we bank the unbanked as opposed to providing better banking service for people who already have banking services, right? Yes. So, that's how things evolve for me.
No, absolutely. And I completely agree with you that it is on a case-by-case basis, and these things don't have to be priced as such. And they happen, yes, and then we will know their impact and we will eventually find the measures. And yet, right? In everything we do, of course, there is effort, there are money involved, and there are people. And in the project which I am leading also, yes, of course, there is always a cost. I realize that, yes, ROI and measures of success for impact projects, I think they have to be somehow redefined and rethought. I do not know if you have an answer, but this is somewhere where I spend a lot of, sleepless nights thinking about, because I want some projects to make them happen. And yet, yes, we cannot see an immediate return, and yet I feel they are important, and yet I cannot define measures of success for them, at least not in the traditional manner. I just wonder if you have some words of wisdom for me here.
Yeah, I think actually that goes back to your original question, which is Wall Street meets
Mother Teresa.
So it's true. Traditionally, I work on margin. I mean, my whole career was about how much money can I make and how do I improve the margin? While I'm still focused, I mean, I'm a zebra, I'm a zebra, right?
Wonderful.
So I'm still focused on margin, but at the end of the day, there are other criteria that matter to this company. So, and to this project. So I tend to have evolved a little bit and focused on not just margin, but how do I provide the resources, and then how do we evaluate ROI? Doesn't have to be quantified only in dollar terms. It could be quantified in other things. I think that we have to understand, and for a guy like me, it's a transition, is how do I understand how to measure taking risk and experimenting and if it's worth it. So as an entrepreneur, I think you focus on things like measuring how you recoup from a failure and make it into a success. And those are measures as well. So it isn't purely margin driven. And, it's like I'm a fluent English speaker and I've got to learn the intricacies of the Japanese language.
Yes.
And that's what I'm going through with this kind of evolution in both technology, entrepreneurism, and in social impact.
Absolutely. And as you are describing the challenge, yes, of course, I want to work with you on this. But it is very clear to me that this is a wicked problem. It's a complex problem. But there are tensions which we want to reconcile. And I'm sure there is room for Wall Street and for the UN SDGs and for the ESGs. And yes, so the future is bright. So thank you so much for clarifying so many of these things for me and for our community, Jeff. That was extremely useful. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you.
Wonderful meeting you.